The rain battered the windows of our Brooklyn apartment, a relentless drumbeat that drowned out the world. I stood frozen in my bedroom, shirtless, my hand clutching a crumpled letter I'd written to someone I'd never have the courage to send. Then the door creaked open, and there was Javier, my roommate, his dark eyes wide, catching me in a moment so private it felt like he'd seen my soul laid bare. I'd known Javier Morales for 6 months, ever since he answered my Craigslist ad for a roommate. He was 26, a graphic designer with a quick laugh and a habit of leaving his sketchbooks scattered across our tiny living room. I'm Ezra Thompson, 24, a barista and aspiring poet, black, quiet, and maybe too comfortable hiding behind my words. We got along fine, shared takeout, argued over Netflix picks, but we weren't close. Not until that night. "Ezra, you okay?" Javier's voice was soft, but it hit like a thunderclap. The letter in my hand was a confession, a messy scrawl of feelings I'd buried since high school. Feelings for men I'd never dared speak aloud. I'd been reading it to myself, practicing, when he walked in. I scrambled to shove it under a notebook, my face burning. I didn't hear you knock," I stammered. He didn't move from the doorway. His damp hoodie clung to his frame, raindrops glistening in his dark hair. "I did knock," he said, his gaze flickering to the letter, then back to me. "You were talking to yourself." I thought something was wrong. His voice held something new, curiosity maybe, or something heavier. Couldn't read it. "It's nothing," I lied, pulling on a t-shirt to cover my vulnerability. But Javier's eyes lingered, not on the letter, but on me. It wasn't judgment. It was something else, something that made my pulse race and my carefully built walls tremble. The next morning, I caught him staring over his coffee mug, his usual easy grin replaced by a quiet intensity. "You write a lot, huh?" he asked, nodding toward my closed bedroom door. I shrugged, stirring my oatmeal, avoiding his gaze. "Just poems. Dumb stuff." But he didn't laugh or let it go. "Didn't sound dumb last night," he said, and my spoon froze midair. Over the next week, the air in our apartment shifted. Javier started lingering when I was around, asking about my writing, my life. He'd sit closer on the couch, his knee brushing mine during movie nights. I told myself I was imagining it, that he was just being friendly. But every time our eyes met, there was a spark, a question neither of us dared ask. One night, he came home late from a client meeting, his tie loose, his face tired but alive. "Ezra," he said, dropping onto the couch beside me, closer than usual, "why don't you ever share your poems?" His voice was low, like he was afraid to break something fragile. I laughed it off, but my heart pounded. "They're personal," I said, my throat tight. "Personal like that letter?" he asked, and I froze. He leaned closer, his breath warm against my cheek. "I didn't mean to see it, but I saw enough. You don't have to hide, you know. Not from me." His words cracked something open inside me, something I'd locked away for years. I wanted to tell him everything, about the letter, about the boy in high school who broke my heart, about the fear that kept me silent. But all I could manage was, "I'm not ready." Javier nodded, his hand brushing mine, lingering just a second too long. "When you are," he said, "I'm here." That night I couldn't sleep. His words echoed in my head, and every creak of the apartment felt like a reminder of how close he was, just across the hall. I'd spent years building walls, convincing myself I was better off alone. But Javier's gaze, his quiet patience, was unraveling me, and I wasn't sure I wanted to stop it. The days that followed were a tightrope walk. Every glance from Javier felt like a question. Every brush of his shoulder an answer I wasn't ready to give. Our apartment, once a neutral space of shared bills and takeout containers, now hummed with unspoken tension. I caught myself watching him too. How his hands moved when he sketched. How his laugh lit up the room. It was dangerous, this pull, and I didn't know how to stop it. One evening, I came home from the coffee shop, exhausted and smelling of espresso, to find Javier in the kitchen, cooking. The air was thick with the scent of garlic and cumin. "Tacos," he announced, grinning. "My mom's recipe. You're eating with me tonight." It wasn't a question. I hesitated, then nodded, dropping my bag by the door. We sat at our rickety dining table, plates piled high. He talked about his day, a difficult client, a new project, but his eyes kept finding mine, searching. "You're quiet tonight," he said finally, pushing his plate aside. "What's going on in that head of yours, Ezra?" I wanted to deflect, to hide behind a joke, but his sincerity disarmed me. "Just thinking," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "About what you said. About not hiding." His fork stilled, and the room seemed to shrink around us. "Ezra," he said, leaning forward, "I meant it. You don't have to be anyone but you. Not with me." His voice was steady, but there was a tremor in it, like he was taking a risk too. I swallowed hard, the weight of years of silence pressing against my chest. "It's not that simple," I said. "I've spent my whole life pretending, hiding who I am. It's not just about the letter." He reached across the table, his hand hovering near mine, not quite touching. "Then tell me," he said, "who are you, Ezra Thompson?" The question hit like a wave, pulling me under. I wanted to tell him about the kid who grew up in Atlanta, who learned early that being different could cost you everything. About the nights I'd spent writing poems to boys I'd never speak to, terrified of what it meant. But instead, I said, "I'm trying to figure that out." Javier didn't push. He just nodded, his hand finally settling over mine, warm and steady. "Take your time," he said. "But I'm not going anywhere." The moment stretched, fragile and electric, until the sound of a neighbor's dog barking snapped us back to reality. He pulled his hand away, but the warmth lingered. The next day, I found a sketch on the coffee table, a pencil drawing of me, sitting at my desk, head bent over a notebook. The detail was staggering. The curve of my jaw, the furrow in my brow, the vulnerability I thought I'd hidden. At the bottom, in Javier's messy scrawl, were the words, "You're enough." My breath caught. He'd seen me, really seen me, in a way no one ever had. That night, I knocked on his bedroom door. He opened it shirtless, his hair still damp from a shower. "Ezra?" he said, surprised. I held up the sketch. "You drew this?" I said, my voice shaking. "Why?" He rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous habit. "Because I see you," he said simply. "And I like what I see." The words hung between us, heavy with possibility. I took a step closer, my heart pounding. "Javier," I whispered, "I'm scared." He reached out, his fingers brushing my cheek. "Me too," he said, and then he kissed me. It was soft, tentative, but it set my world on fire. For the first time, I didn't feel like I had to hide. The kiss changed everything. The apartment, once a place of routine, now felt like a minefield of new emotions. Javier and I didn't talk about it the next morning, but the air was different, charged, alive. We danced around each other, careful not to break whatever fragile thing was growing between us. But every touch, every glance, felt like a promise. A week later, we went to a local art show in Williamsburg, one of Javier's designs on display. The gallery was crowded, buzzing with hipsters and critics sipping cheap wine. Javier was nervous, his usual confidence replaced by fidgeting hands. I stayed close, trying to anchor him. "You're gonna steal the show?" I whispered, nudging his shoulder. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Halfway through the night, A woman approached us. Mid-30s, sharp suit, sharper gaze. Javier Morales? She asked, extending a hand. I'm Claudia Reyes, curator. Your work's impressive. Javier lit up and they talked shop for a while. Then her eyes flicked to me. And you're? She asked, her tone curious but guarded. Ezra, his roommate, I said, shaking her hand. Javier's smile faltered, just for a second, and I felt a pang. Roommate. The word felt too small, too safe for what we were becoming. Claudia raised an eyebrow but didn't press. Later, as we walked home through the chilly night, Javier was quiet. You okay? I asked, bumping his arm. He stopped under a streetlight, his breath visible in the cold. Roommate, he said, not quite a question. Is that all I am to you? My stomach dropped. I hadn't meant to hurt him, but the word had slipped out, a reflex from years of caution. No, I said, stepping closer. You're more. I don't know how to do this, Javier. I trailed off, gesturing vaguely at the space between us. He nodded, his expression softening. I get it, he said, but I need to know you're in this with me. Because I am, Ezra. All in. His words hit hard, stirring up fears I'd buried deep. What if this didn't work? What if I wasn't enough? But looking into his eyes, I saw something worth risking everything for. I'm in, I whispered, and he pulled me into a kiss. Right there on the sidewalk, the world fading away. Back home, we really talked, for the first time. I told him about growing up in a neighborhood where being gay wasn't just frowned upon. It was dangerous. About the letter he'd caught me with, written to a boy who'd never know how I felt. Javier listened, his hand in mine, and then shared his own story. A conservative family in Texas, a coming out that nearly broke them. But I'm here now, he said, and I'm not hiding anymore. We fell asleep on the couch, tangled together, the city humming outside. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe. The next few weeks were a blur of stolen moments. Kisses in the kitchen, late-night talks, Javier's sketches piling up, each one capturing a piece of me. But the world outside our apartment wasn't as kind. One night, we went to a bar in the East Village, a place known for its inclusivity. We were laughing, hands intertwined, when a guy at the bar muttered something under his breath. I didn't catch the words, but Javier's grip tightened. Ignore him, I said, but Javier's jaw was set. I'm tired of ignoring, he snapped, loud enough for the guy to hear. The man turned, sneering. Got a problem, buddy? He asked, his voice dripping with venom. The bar went quiet, all eyes on us. Javier stood, his voice steady but fierce. Yeah, I do. You got something to say. Say it to my face. I grabbed his arm, pulling him back. Javier, don't, I whispered, my heart racing. I'd seen fights like this before, back home, and they never ended well. The guy backed off, muttering, but the moment left a mark. On the walk home, Javier was silent, his anger simmering. I'm sorry, he said finally, stopping outside our building. I hate that we have to deal with this, that you have to. I took his hand, squeezing it. We're in this together, I said, echoing his words from weeks before. He nodded, but the weight of the world lingered in his eyes. The next day, I found an email from my sister, Maya, back in Atlanta. She'd heard through a friend that I'd been seen with a guy. Is it true? She wrote. You can tell me, Ezra. I love you no matter what. My hands shook as I read it. I hadn't come out to my family, hadn't planned to. The fear of losing them had kept me silent. But Javier's courage was rubbing off on me. I called Maya that night, Javier sitting beside me for support. Yeah, it's true, I said, my voice breaking. I'm gay. There was a long pause and I braced for the worst. Then she said, "I'm proud of you, Ezra. I just want you to be happy." Tears stung my eyes as I hung up, and Javier pulled me into his arms. "You did it," he whispered, and I felt a weight lift. But the world wasn't done testing us. A week later, Javier got a call from his parents. They were coming to New York for a visit. "They don't know about us," he admitted, his voice tight. "And they're not open-minded." The fear in his eyes mirrored my own. We'd built something beautiful, but it was fragile, and the real world was knocking. Javier's parents arrived on a crisp October morning, their voices filling our apartment with a warmth that felt forced. His mother, Elena, was all smiles, but his father, Carlos, carried a quiet disapproval in his posture. I stayed polite, distant, playing the role of just the roommate. Javier's eyes kept finding mine, a silent plea for strength. Over dinner at a diner nearby, the tension broke. Carlos asked Javier about his future plans, his tone heavy with expectation. "You need to settle down, Mijo," he said. "Find a good girl, start a family." Javier's fork clattered against his plate. "Dad," he said, his voice shaking, "I'm not hiding who I am anymore. I'm with Ezra." The silence was deafening. Elena's eyes widened, and Carlos's face hardened. "What are you saying?" he demanded. Javier took my hand under the table, his grip fierce. "I'm saying I love him," he said, his voice steady now, "and I'm not ashamed of it." Carlos stood, his chair scraping the floor. "This isn't right," he said, his voice low but sharp. "You're throwing your life away." Elena grabbed his arm, whispering something, but he stormed out. Javier's shoulders slumped, and I squeezed his hand, my heart aching for him. Back at the apartment, Elena stayed behind to talk. "I don't understand," she said, tears in her eyes. "But I don't want to lose you, Javier." It wasn't acceptance, not yet, but it was a start. Carlos didn't come back that night, and Javier barely spoke, his pain a tangible thing. The next morning, I found him sketching at the kitchen table, his eyes red. "I thought I was ready for this," he said, his voice raw. "But it hurts." I sat beside him, my hand on his back. "You were brave," I said, "and you're not alone." He leaned into me, and we sat there, holding each other, the world outside fading away. Weeks later, I performed at an open mic, my first time reading my poems aloud. Javier was in the front row, his smile brighter than the stage lights. I read a poem about love, about finding home in someone's eyes, and the crowd cheered, but his gaze was all I saw. Afterward, he kissed me in front of everyone, unapologetic and free. Carlos never fully came around, but Elena started calling, asking questions, trying to understand. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Javier and I kept building our life, one moment at a time. Tacos on Tuesdays, sketches on the coffee table, poems taped to the fridge. We were messy, imperfect, but we were enough. In the end, love wasn't just the spark between us. It was the courage to be seen, to stand tall, to choose each other despite the world's weight. And every time Javier looked at me, I knew I'd never hide again.